Hello, Edward.
Good morning, Jonathan. Pleased to meet you. Please come in.
Thank you very much. EdwardDorricot, thank you very much indeed for hosting us and offering to share your memories with us of John Phipps and the Coventry Preparatory School.
My very great pleasure, Jay.
Thank you. The first question I'd like to ask is, how did you find out about the prep school position and come to be at the school?
Well, I found an advert in the Times Educational Supplement. This would have been in 1989, and the advert was for a director of music at Coventry Prep School. Now, I did know of the school because a few years before that, I'd been on secondment in Coventry. I had a year's sabbatical, which was a great privilege to be able to enjoy that. And it was on the south side of Coventry and to do with teaching music. So of course I went past the school on various trips up and down the Kenilworth Road, so I had noticed it was there. And when I saw the advert in the TES, I had been keeping my eyes open for advertisements, but I thought, no, that looks just me. I should explain that I've been at New Oscar Middle School here in Sutton Coldfield for the best part of 20 years, and had a very happy time there and was still very happy at it. But I thought by that time I was due for a change, really. And I suppose having this year's sabbatical made me think about where the future lay. So I replied to the advertisement and I was called for interview. I went to the school, and a few days later I received a phone call from John offering me the job, and I had no hesitation whatsoever in saying yes please.
Okay, that's lovely. What were your first impressions of the school and John?
Well, I suppose my first impression really was on the interview day, where I was interviewed by John himself, Martin Green, and my predecessor as Director of Music, Richard Wilby, and I felt that went well. I was impressed by John as obviously a Christian gentleman of traditional values. And after the interview had taken place, it was a Wednesday afternoon, so the game's going on the school field, and I sat on the bench with Richard, and we had a tray of tea and cakes while the boys were playing their cricket in their whites. And afterwards I had a little chat with John, and I thought to myself, this is the school I really would like to be a part of. I suppose my impression really is that the school was very much a reflection of John's own philosophy and personality and his own approach to life, and he brought a sort of Oxford type of quality to the prep school, which, to my way of thinking, was unique.
Right, yes, that's very interesting point, because Coventry actually was quite, or it still is in fact, quite an industrial town, with some history of class conflict. Did you feel that this prep school kind of belonged, or was it in some way anachronistic?
Well, I'm not a Coventryan myself, but I had visited many times. First of all, when I was a schoolboy myself, a friend and I cycled to see what was happening at the cathedral. It was then still being built, and I visited Coventry many times since. So I had some idea of what Coventry was like. But of course, the school was in a very lovely part of the town, very green surroundings, bordered by trees and with the memorial park opposite. And it had, of course, connections with the cathedral. Some of the boys at the school were cathedral choristers, although the pupils did come from a very wide area. And it never struck me that it was out of place in any way at all. It seemed to be very much part of that part of the city and serving a wider area.
Now, John was quite strict with the boys, as I have experience of, as I was perhaps a bit naughty at that time. But in private, I think I found him more humorous and light-hearted. How was he with the staff?
Well, John certainly had a very good sense of humour. He could see the funny side of many situations. But as far as the staff was concerned, I think it's fair to say that he trusted us as professionals with integrity, expected us to do the best. And that for me was a very refreshing outlook. Yes, he could be strict with the boys, but very fair too, and very encouraging of the youngsters in his charge.
What some of the comments that have been made is that John trusted you as a professional.
Yes.
So does that mean, did he micromanage in any way? Or?
No, he very much left us to get on with the job. I mean, I did, of course, discuss with him on many occasions what I had in mind to do with the music, and he was always very, very supportive, but he listened carefully and did make comments about what I proposed, and that discussion was fair enough. But I think as far as the general business of teaching is concerned, yes, he having appointed us to do the job and seen that we were capable of it, he didn't interfere with what we were doing at all. He was always very appreciative of what was done, I found, and didn't try to redirect what I was suggesting.
So as a kind of, how did you find him as a kind of a man manager, if you like, or a manager of the school?
I suppose from my point of view, ideal. Encouraging, supportive, and very appreciative of what was done, but without interfering.
And what did you talk about in the staff room? Because that was a very kind of strange world for us pupils. It was very kind of, when I remember it as a kind of a smoke-filled, sort of a dimly lit place full of comfy chairs.
Well, yes, there were some ancient leather armchairs as well as, I think, harder benches. But what did we talk about? I suppose inevitably things that the boys had done and said. I remember Frank Mottram reminiscing about his days from the past and anecdotes from when he'd been at Bablake School. I remember, there were all sorts of things talked about, intellectual and otherwise. I remember Jeff Eames once discussing our posture, and we all had to stand up and receive scrutiny as to whether he thought our deportment were correct or otherwise. A lot of things were talked about. But, because John himself used to come in sometimes, which would add an interest to the conversations going on. I remember him coming in once, quoting a Bible verse, "Oh, where shall wisdom be found?" And another occasion he came in with a hymn book open, reading the words of Joseph Addison's hymn about the created world and its evidence for a divine hand. And he read on in the last verse, "In reason's ear they all rejoice. "Ah, yes," said John, and he was writing in the Age of Reason. So that led on to an interesting conversation around the staff room too.
Thank you for that. Now, you mentioned that John left the school 2 years after you started. So you would have seen some considerable, well, you would have seen some changes at the school. But how would you describe them? Or were there any changes at all?
Well, inevitably there were changes because I guess that each head that comes to the school needs to impress his personality and view on the way things are done. But over and above that, of course, there were national requirements being required. The national curriculum was coming in, for example, and the start of more regimentation and documentation of everything. So there were changes like that. And of course the big change, I suppose, after John's departure was that the school became mixed for boys and girls as well. But I stayed there at the school for, well, it would be another 13 years after John left until I retired.
Yes, sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, I do remember while I was there in those 2 years, the negotiations going on for the transfer of the school to the Coventry School Foundation in preparation for John's retirement. And when I first heard that he was going to hand over the school, I must say I did feel devastated, because it had been such a wonderful 2 years for me personally under his inspiring headship. But when the school became part of Coventry School Foundation, we had David Clark, who had been at the King Henry Junior School as our head, and he was a lovely man, and it was a great privilege and pleasure to work for him too.
Did the philosophy of the school change a great deal while you were there? Or after John, really?
It
suppose it depends how you define the philosophy of the school.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, it was the same during John's time, because, as I've already implied, the school was really an extension of his own personality, philosophy, beliefs, his own academic approach. It was very much his school, and in a sense, some things went when he did, but it was still a very rewarding school to work in, and I'm so grateful for all the years I had there.
What was the most satisfying part of your job while you were there?
All of it, really. I suppose initially in John's time it was building on foundations that Richard Wilby had laid, because it was he who introduced music to the school. But generally I really felt very privileged to be part of such a community with its academic and its spiritual tone. As I say, during John's day it really was an extension of him. I remember some of his traditions, like Shrove Tuesday, the first Shrove Tuesday I was there, all the staff were invited, according to his custom, into his apartment in the school, and there he would expertly cook and toss the pancakes, of which we would all partake. And next morning he would lead a very devotional assembly for Ash Wednesday to put all of us, staff and pupils, along the right lines for thinking about Lent and all it meant. And I suppose in some ways that type of tradition went when John did, but maybe it was replaced by others of equal merit.
Trixie Leach mentioned to me that she felt that the school was a kind of a very close-knit family. It had a familial sort of touch to it, didn't agree with that?
Oh yes, I would. I mean, I've never had any desire to teach in sort of school where there are 1,000 plus pupils. And yes, I found the small community, the family atmosphere, the ability to know the pupils more closely and to help them in a way that was relevant to themselves. That was a great benefit and something which I warmed to. It was a sort of small school that really suited me as a member of the staff.
Well, those were the pros of being in a small, close-knit school. Can you think of any drawbacks or?
I suppose some people might, but as far as I'm concerned, there were no cons at all. It's all pros.
That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned that the school did turn to single sex, and you probably had a lot of experience of that, more experience than some of the other teachers I interviewed. What were your thoughts about that? Being a mixed school, girls and boys. It obviously would have changed. But in your view, did you prefer teaching just boys, or did it make no difference?
Well, of course, I've been associated with both types. When I went to Coventry Prep first and taught under John, I did teach in lower school as well. He asked if I would like to take music with the young ones, 4 years old and upwards, and I said, yes please, I would love to. And of course, there were girls as well as boys in the lower school, so I did have that experience at the school. Myself, when I was a grammar school boy, I went to Bishop Eases in St Colford, which was boys only, and still is, until you get to the sixth form. And I can see the advantage for both. I know it was John's philosophy that boys of the age in the upper school needed, as he explained to me, protecting from girls because they tend to develop at a different rate from boys, and he felt that the boys were more forthcoming when there wasn't educational competition between the two sexes. Certainly I found when I was at the Coventry Prep School that all the boys were very, very willing to have a go at things musical without any fear of competition or comparison with girls. Mind, as I said, I've taught in mixed schools, quite apart from in Coventry, and I haven't had any particular difficulty in that respect either. So I think there are arguments for and against, but after John's time, the upper part of the prep school certainly became co-educational, and I think it's probably in the times in which we live a good thing.
Can you recall any anecdotes, particularly of your time with John?
I suppose I remember the staff meetings. Now these days, schools have to have staff meetings several times a week, and sometimes every day. But in John's time, there was one staff meeting a year, which was held at the end of the summer term. It might even have been an event that went on for 2 days to review the past year and to make plans for the next year. That was a system that seemed to work very well as far as I can see. But I do remember round the table, 2 members of staff were discussing something between themselves, and John paused in what he was saying and addressing the multitude and said, "We seem to have 2 meetings going on at the moment. I think we better have just only one." It was so gentlemanly a way of making the comment, and I think very, very typical of John. I also remember parents' evenings, because they were done in John's own way. There would be John himself and Martin and the form master, and I think perhaps another member of the staff as well present, sitting at the teacher's table, and the parents sat in the pupil's desk in a obviously subservient position. And John was explaining to parents once that their son wasn't really pulling his weight in the Latin lessons. And he said after a while, "You know, I don't think he deserves to do Latin," which I thought was a wonderful way of looking at education. Of course, sheep featured largely in the school. John was an expert sheep breeder, and very often he would call the boys together. He had a group who helped. At lunchtime, of course, John would sit at his long oak refectory table with a place laid for him with a white serviette in its silver serviette ring. And after the meal, he would proceed to the desk at the front and get some notices. And one of them might be, "There will be a meeting for the shepherds at 1:30. So the boys knew that they had to go and help with that. And the boys used to say that John himself sometimes would spend the whole night with the sheep when it was lambing time. And I can remember I hadn't been at school very long before one morning coffee break, John popped his head round the staff room door and said to me, "Come and see this." And he took me outside, and there was a lamb being born. And John's obvious sense of wonder and care at this was something that I shan't forget.
So, I mean, how does it all appear to you now, looking back at it? You know, because obviously time has passed, and time does funny things to memories. But how does it all appear to you?
Well, I think the 2 years that I spent under John's headship were in very many ways the pinnacle of my teaching career, and I say that with no disrespect for the wonderful heads that I've worked for before and since. But the quality that John brought to the school and to the boys, to the staff, to the whole experience of life was something that was unique. It certainly enriched my own life. And I kept in touch with John after he retired and after I retired too, and that was 11 years ago now. John, of course, moved to home farm at Ardens, Grafton, near Ulster. Continued to look after sheep, although he did have help with them latterly. I used to visit him there, and we'd have a chat on the phone, and I knew he was ill. And one time he said to me, "Edward, the cancer's come back, and this time I think it's the final call." It was very sad to hear him say that, but I did visit him very shortly before he passed away. I had the great honour of singing in the choir at the church for John's funeral, and Richard Wilby and I had been asked to play the organ, Richard beforehand, and myself afterwards, which was in a way my final opportunity of a tribute to John. And I chose to play on the organ box, "Sheep They Safely Graze," because I thought that would have been appropriate to him. And a final memory, really. I wish I'd had my camera at the time, but the image is clear in my mind. It was after school one winter's evening, the sun was very low, and John was walking away from the school buildings across the field, surrounded by a swirling cloud of his cigar smoke, which was backlit by the low sun. He was wearing his wide-brimmed hat and his drover's coat, and surrounded by his beloved sheep. And I was reminded of the Good Shepherd in St John's Gospel, who knows his sheep by name and leads them out to find pasture. And it's my hope and prayer that John is now resting in the loving care of the Shepherd and the Bishop of our souls.
That was lovely, thank you. Edward Dorricot, I thank you very much for sharing those wonderful memories with us and for hosting us. It's been a wonderful morning. Thank you.
My very great privilege.